In this video, we're going to take a very detailed look at what Vice President Kamala Harris must do to secure and win the 2024 presidential election. As you can see on the Electoral College map that we have in front of us here, she has 226 Electoral College votes to President Trump's 219. And we're basing this on races that we'll be able to have called early in the evening and then getting a little bit later into the evening. But what we're going to take a look at right now is the 7 swing states, the 7 battleground states. And yes, we've got 7. Typically, we would have had Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those 3 states would have been the states that determine the next president of the United States. But now we've got North Carolina in the mix. We've got Georgia in the mix. We've got Arizona and Nevada in the mix. We're going to take a look at those. We're going to take a very analytical look. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. Stick with me to the end. And if you really like what we got going on here, I'd love to have you subscribe. That way you'll get instant updates each time I post a new video. So here we go. We're going to dive into Wisconsin. Wisconsin in 2020 was won by Joe Biden by, look at this, 20,608 votes, 0.7%. Those are 10 huge electoral college votes. Let's go to Wisconsin. This is the most current data that we have available to us at the moment. Kamala Harris up by about 1 percentage point. Now let's go back to the previous elections, 2016. Clinton was up 4.7 at this time. We know that Trump won the state of Wisconsin in 2016 presidential election. Biden was up almost 7% in 2020. He won the state by less than 21,000 votes. We can see that President Trump, with 67% of the registered voters in Wisconsin, that's a large amount, by the way. That's a really large turnout. So you can see how big this election was. But with 67% of the turnout, President Trump took out Hillary Clinton, 47% to 46%. This was very close. This was less than a percentage point, 3/4 of a percentage point. So he took those 10 electoral college votes. Remember, with 67% of the vote, registered voters voting. When Biden took the state of Wisconsin, barely, by less than 21,000 votes. But look at this, 72% of the registered voters turned out to vote. 67% in 2016, Trump won. 72%, a 5% increase in the registered voters turning out in this very contested 2020 Wisconsin election. Biden barely pulled this off by 20,000 votes. Vice President Kamala Harris will need to pull the same trick out of her hat. If 67% turnout, 68, 69, 70, 71% turnout in this election, she will not carry Wisconsin. She has to have Joe Biden turnout numbers because he only won us by 20,000. And 5% of the state has increased, and 5% of the registered voters turned out to vote. She's going to have those kind of numbers. 2016, President Trump won Michigan. He was down by 4.7% going into late September in the polling, and he won the state of Michigan. Biden, at the same time 4 years ago, was up 6.4% again. Biden did win the state. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The current polling right now has Vice President Harris up about 1.7%. These polls are very interesting. You see here's a 2%, Trump up by 1, tie, Trump, Harris by 1, tie here as well. Not sure what's going on with these two. They seem to be outliers, but nevertheless, we are going to, Quinnipiac is a very reputable polling agency, so we're going to include them in this poll. But right now, state of Michigan, Vice President Harris is up 1.7%. In 2016, the state of Michigan went to President Trump very narrowly. Let's take a look here. Less than 0.25%. Trump won the 2016 Michigan 16 electoral college votes, won it by a very narrow margin. Very narrow margin. We are talking less than 9,000 votes. That's just incredible. The voter turnout, 63%. very heavy. You had two very polarizing candidates running for the presidency, turned out the vote. But again, Trump won it by only 0.25%, less than 9,000 votes. Joe Biden won the state by a little larger spread. About 55,000 votes here. But I want you to look at this. 71% of the registered voters in the state of Michigan turned out to vote. 71%, an 8% increase. So this was a very, very, very highly contested election. There was just a lot of issues that turned out the vote. But again, 8%. In the state of Michigan in 2024, Vice President Harris is going to need that 68, 69% voter turnout. She's going to have a massive turnout. If 63% voter turnout, 64, 65, even 66, she's going to have a very difficult time. So she has to move her base. She's going to have to get to the middle, pull the independents in, and the voters that are disgruntled with President Trump for whatever it may be. It's probably not so much his policies, but it's definitely maybe his tone and the way he presents things. She's going to have to go after those voters. But again, she's going to have to turn out really close to this kind of number right here. She's going to need to be in that 69 to 71% range in order to win Michigan's 16 electoral college votes. Pennsylvania is going to decide the 2024 presidential election. It will be with a combination of a couple other scenarios, a couple other states, 2 or 3, but whoever wins Pennsylvania in 2024, whether it's Vice President Harris or whether it's President Trump, whoever wins this state right here is going to be the 47th President of the United States. Now let's look right now. Harris, and I want you to just look at this. We've gone through some of the other different poll results and things like that. You'll see 5 polls, 8 polls. Look at this right here. Man, there's a lot of polling agencies that are canvassing the state of Pennsylvania. It is the heart, the hotbed, the pulse of what's going on in this presidential election. This time 8 years ago, Clinton had almost a 6% lead. Biden was pulling about 4.5 points ahead. We're going to dive into some numbers here, some analytical numbers in just a second, get deep. Right now, though, she's got about a 0.7% lead. That's crazy. That's just close. Hill Emerson here has Trump up by 2-1. We got a tie. You got insider advantage, got Trump up by 2. Here's the post. It's a tie. And then you got some, here again, Quinnipiac, a little bit of an outlier. Has Harris up by 5. New York Times Siena, fairly credible. Little left, but credible nonetheless, up 4. So there's just a lot going on here. Is Trump up by 2, another up by 2, tie. This thing is really, really, really going down to the wire. It will be decided in the late hours, early morning hours of Wednesday morning, November 6th, where Trump surprised everybody. Remember, Trump going into election night down anywhere between 4.5 and 7 points in some polls. And he pulled this out by about a little over 44,000 votes. Look how close again. We're talking 0.7 of a percentage point, a little over 40,000 votes. Voter turnout, 71.3% of the registered voters in Pennsylvania turned out for the 2016 election. I want y'all to wrap your minds around something here. If you were to go back and look at previous presidential elections, even with Obama and, with Bush, both Bushes, Obama, the Clintons, there's a lot of passion. But 70% voter turnout, it's really hard to get to 50% in a lot of states. We've seen states at 30, 40% in an election year. Trump and Clinton, Trump and Biden, and now Trump and Harris. It's going to turn voters out. It's very important, though, and I'm going to show you something here in just a second. Kamala has to have Biden type of turnout in order to win these swing states. in order to win these battleground states. 2016, Trump won Michigan, but look at this 71% voter turnout. President Biden won Pennsylvania by a very, very close margin. Now remember, he was polling up 6%. 6% going into the last 4 or 5 weeks. He won this state by 80,000 votes. He won it by 80,000 votes. 71% of registered voters turned out in 16. 76.5%. These are hundreds of thousands of extra votes and extra voters that had to turn out to get Biden across the finish line. Harris is going to have to pull off this kind of number. She cannot be at 75%. She can't be at 73 or 74%. She is going to have to turn out the base. And I'm telling you, Pennsylvania has probably the highest percentage of voters that are sitting in the middle. They are not going to make their mind up until they go into that booth and pull that voting lever. That's just how Pennsylvania is going to go down. The candidates are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this state. It's definitely going to determine who's the president, with a combination of a couple other states that can play into the equation. But just, you got to understand, this is massive turnout. Almost 77% of the registered voters in this entire state turned out to vote in 2020. There's a lot at stake, but Vice President Harris is going to have to turn out these type of numbers in order to secure the presidency. Georgia is not a must-win for Vice President Harris, but if she can somehow pull a rabbit out of her hat and take Georgia, it's going to decrease the paths and make it much more difficult for President Trump. Trump is highly counting on Georgia. He won Georgia in 2016. We're going to go look at that and dive deep here in just a second. It was a big, big role. Georgia played a huge role in President Trump's victory in 2016. Let's look at the polls here. Again, Hill Emerson, very credible polling agency. Trafalgar, here's Quinnipiac. We've seen them before, Insider Advantage. This is kind of straight across the board. It's just all red right here. You have a couple of ties. We've seen Trump start to gain some traction, and he really hasn't looked back. Trump was in the lead 4% in 2016 and also was in the lead here in 2020. If you see Trump typically polling ahead in some of these battleground states, it's a huge chance that he's going to pull that state out. But again, he was up by 1.3 here in 2020, and Biden pulled it out. President Trump with 60% voter turnout, and mind you, let's take a look over here. It was about 1.8% lower turnout than it was in 2012. So 60% voter turnout, which is still a large voter turnout for any state. I mean, there's a lot of governors and there's a lot of political parties that would love to get these voter turnouts at 40 and 50% on any given election year. You're talking 60% here. That's massive. Trump pulled this off by almost 200,000 votes. Won it fairly easily. Look at here, we're looking over 5%. And so it was definitely, Trump's message resonated. The country was calling for change at this time. Trump did very well in Georgia in 2016. President Biden pulled this off, but look how close. Less than 8,000 votes. That's it's hard to really comprehend that. If you follow the elections over the years, when you really dove in deep to analytics and numbers and things like I do, and I love to do it, 8,000 votes, and we're talking multiple states over the course of the 2020 election, where you had multiple states that were decided by under 25,000 votes. But Biden pulled it out. But here again, let's go and look. He had to turn out an additional 6% of the registered voters. 66%. Remember, we saw 60% In 2016, Trump won by 130,000 votes. With an additional several hundreds of thousands of voters turning out, Biden only took this state by 8,000. Vice President Harris is going to have a turnout at least 66%. And you may see this at 68 or 69%, maybe push 70. That would just be insane. But it could be that. This is so highly contested. Again, Vice President Harris does not have to have Georgia. But if somehow she can pull this out, and it's going to be difficult for her, but if she could pull this out, she would have a little more control over the 2024 results. It'd make it a little bit harder for Trump. But some of the things that she has going against her is both Senate seats are locked down for another 2 to 4 years. There's nothing up ballot that could help her. The Republican governor, Kemp, Georgia, very popular governor. So it's just going to be very difficult for her to get this kind of base moved out. I'm not saying she can't do it. It's going to be tough. She doesn't have to have Georgia, but if she can pull Georgia out, it's going to cut President Trump's paths to the White House down. It's going to narrow it drastically. Arizona, all these electoral college votes are very critical. I mean, each candidate wants to harness as many votes as they can, just in case there's some crazy anomaly. Trump is actually, crazy as it sounds, Trump is actually polling really well in Minnesota. That was just unheard of. He's polling very well in Minnesota. New Hampshire is always, a coin toss. And so each candidate definitely wants to win all the electoral college votes that they can get into their saddle. But let's look at Arizona. In 2016, Trump went into that election, late into the election process, the campaign process, about 1.6% lead. 2020, Biden at this time was up about 4%. Now, Trump is polling very well here. Harris got a bump after Biden withdrew on July 21st. She got that initial bump. She didn't receive any bump at all post-convention. So she is spending a little money in there, but you can see that she is not making the visits to Arizona that she's making to Michigan, to Pennsylvania, to Wisconsin, and another critical state that we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. But Arizona, again, it's more critical to Trump to pull off Arizona and to secure Arizona and the electoral college votes in that state than it is for Vice President Harris. If she is able to go in and steal this state, and it would be a steal, it would be a steal. It doesn't matter what some of these other outlying polls are saying. She is not favored at any time, at any level, and is very unlikely to win this state. But if she does, she really starts to drive a nail into the Trump campaign coffin. Let's take a look at the 2016 presidential election in Arizona. Trump won this pretty handily. 3.5%, actually 3% exactly, took those electoral college votes, 11 of those votes. This was a nice win for him, about 91,000 votes. But look at the voter turnout. Again, 74% of the registered voters in Arizona turned out to vote in the 2016 election. Again, for those of you that don't understand what that means, that is a massive, massive turnout. It is so hard for states to get 40%, 50% of their registered voters to turn out. So you had two candidates, very polarizing, but they energized their base. But the glass ceiling was not broken. Just incredibly highly contested. President Biden won those electoral college votes, 11 of those votes, by 11,000. Less than 11,000. 10,500 votes. And I want you to take a look at this. Remember we saw just a minute ago with the voter turnout of 74%. 80%. 80% of the registered voters in the state of Arizona turned out to vote. That is incredible. But it took that extra 5%, almost 6% increase. And I need you to understand that is hundreds of thousands of extra votes just to get Biden across the finish line, like limping across the finish line by less than 10,500 votes. He won this by 0.3% of a percent. That is just incredible. In order for Vice President Harris, and again, Arizona, she does not have to have Arizona to win. She does not have to have it. It's very unlikely that she is going to win this state at the end. It's just very unlikely that she's going to win this state. But if she does, it will make Trump's path very, very, very difficult. She needs to have this kind of turnout. She can't have 75%. She can't have 74%. She will get beat by over 100,000 if she does. If she can push this 80%, we saw it was done here. If she can do that, she's got an opportunity to steal this state from President Trump. Now, 2020 Nevada presidential election was a different story. Nevada is a state that Trump lost in 2016 and 2020. We're going to get really analytical on those two elections as well. But let's take a look here. Hillary Clinton won Nevada. Won Nevada 2016. President Joe Biden won it 2020. Vice President Harris is polling here at about 0.2% lead. She's got to really do a lot better than that. Now, again, Nevada's important because it's a state that Democrats win. Republicans do not win Nevada very often. Trump could not secure this in 2016, very close. Couldn't snatch it in 2020. She is currently leading here, but you see how close these polls are. She really, really, really needs to hold on Nevada. It's not going to be a dire situation for her, but it could complicate things for her. If Trump were to pull out Nevada, that's a huge steal for him. And it gives him a couple of other options later in the evening on November 5th, in the early morning hours of November 6th. It gives him another option or two if he pulls this out. She should win this, but here again, she's hanging on by a thread. Hillary Clinton won the state narrowly. We're talking a little over 27,000 votes, about 2.5%. 27,000 votes. That's so narrow. Look at the voter turnout, though. Almost 77%. Vice President Harris is going to have to turn out these type of numbers. We'll jump over to 2020 and see the comparison here in just a minute. But she's going to have to be up in the 77 to 80% range. Remember, some of Trump's policies now are very, very, very popular with the casino workers, with the blue-collar workers in that state. The no tip on taxes, that's going very well for him. He is the author of that. Vice President Harris sort of kind of cloned that idea when she became nominated. And so, it's kind of, they're both in that direction on that policy, but Trump sort of is going to get the credit for that. Trump should not win this state. Again, this is you look here, the bulk of the state is red, but you got, Clark County and these other very populated areas which border California really dictate the policy, the voting in that state, dictate the governorship, dictate the senators that are elected there. But she should not lose this state. And if she does, it's going to sort of be a sign of possibly what's taken place earlier in the evening on the whole other side of the country in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Georgia. So I don't see her losing Nevada at the end of the story, but Trump is pulled this thing very, very, very close. About the same, about 78%. So very identical turnout, very similar turnout 2016, 2020. With that 78% voter turnout, it was enough for him to carry the state over Trump and those 6 electoral college votes by about 34,000 votes, a little under 35,000. And if you look at the voting pattern here again, we saw just previously a lot of red right here, but you got Clark County, you got the bordering California counties here. Um, this just should stay in the Democrat camp. Vice President Harris should not lose this state. But again, the polls show this is extraordinarily close. Is a lot closer than it should be for her right now. Carolina is a very, very critical state in this 2024 presidential election. North Carolina has 16 electoral college votes. Like North Carolina by itself has as many electoral college votes as Arizona and Nevada together, nearly. Very important state. Trump won North Carolina in 2016, won it by almost 200,000 votes. 2020, won it by about 75,000 votes over President Joe Biden. Right now, this is extraordinarily close. Trump was actually behind in the polls. As soon as Biden pulled out on July 21st, there was a surge of momentum for the Harris camp. She actually took the lead, a small lead, and she maintained that for a very short period of time. But over the last couple of weeks, we've seen the polls show Trump's base has come back into play. There's some moderate voters, some independent voters that are leaning into his camp. But again, if you look here, you got Harris is up by 1 in this poll, Trump up by 1 here, 3, 2. It's just very tight. Everything's within about 3 percentage points. Trump has a narrow lead right here. This is a concern for the Trump campaign. They really would like to have that 2.5% bump. If he's up 1.5, 2.5, 3 points on election night, he's probably going to be able to secure this state. Not too much difficulty. If it's in this area right here, there's going to be some concern, and North Carolina is not going to be called at the closing of the polls, and it's probably not going to be called at 9 or 10 o'clock. I think North Carolina is going to be more like a midnight East Coast time, 1 a.m. East Coast time before they're able to call that state for either candidate. Now, in 2016, Trump really won North Carolina very, very handily. A little over 3%, a little over 3.5%, excuse me, those 15 electoral college votes. It's worth 16 electoral college votes now because of the Charlotte area has grown so much in population over the last 2 cycles. North Carolina actually gained an extra electoral college vote. That is huge. That is huge, especially in elections like this, where 1 or 2 electoral college votes either way could sway an entire election. Not likely, but it's possible. There are some formulas out there. So there are some experts out there that have looked at the possibility, of a tie and how that would play out. But when you get 1 or 2 electoral college votes in play, that's huge. Trump won this with 65% of the voter turnout, won it by 130,000 votes. 180,000 votes. President Biden cut that in half. Trump, very close. This was not called till very late into the evening. It was a surprise. It was not called until very late into the evening in 2020. Biden cut this from 180,000 vote victory for Trump in 2016 down to just a little over 74,000 votes. So the Democrats did make some headway into North Carolina. It's going to be very interesting this year. It could be along this corridor right here. I believe it's going to be decided by less than 100,000. There's a huge political uproar taking place. There's some turmoil taking place in the Republican Party over the Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who is running against Stein for the governorship. There's been some scandal that has come out over the last few days. CNN reported last Thursday. Very scandalous story involving the current lieutenant governor. President Trump had given him very high accolades, was supporting him, had actually campaigned with him. They campaigned together at a couple of events. Trump has not really commented on this news story or this event, but this could pose a problem. I don't see it. Trump's base is going to vote for Trump regardless. They're not even paying attention to who the vice president is, I guarantee you. It doesn't matter J.D. Vance or anybody else. The focus is on this guy right here, this man right here. And so Vice President Harris, though, for the first time in several elections, she has a chance to snatch this away from President Trump. She's doing very well in the state. There's a lot of energy in the state. Her voter base and the excitement in cities like Charlotte have ramped it up. And so Trump is spending a whole lot of time in North Carolina over the last couple of weeks. So this will be interesting. It's still going to be very difficult for her to pull this out. But if she can snatch Carolina, it just would make it extraordinarily difficult for President Trump to win the election. He would almost surely have to guarantee that he would take Pennsylvania. He would need to win Arizona and Nevada, have to take that. He would have to win Georgia. There are some scenarios where, he could lose North Carolina, win Pennsylvania, and sneak in and take Wisconsin. But again, it's just so close right now. But the vice president, she has a very good opportunity, probably the best opportunity for a Democrat presidential candidate in the last 20 years to win North Carolina. Let's look at a couple of scenarios here. Right now, according to the current polls, Vice President Harris would be in the lead in Wisconsin. She's also leading in Michigan. She's also leading in Nevada. Okay. We'll go over here and take a look at President Trump. He, currently has some security in Arizona. It got tight. He's starting to make some headway. He's starting to hold his base there. And as you can see right now, we're at 257 for Vice President Harris, 230 for President Trump. Georgia, that's in the Trump camp at the moment. Let's take a look at that. This is where it's going to be decided right here. Either one of these two states, Pennsylvania puts Vice President Kamala Harris over the top. Wouldn't matter what happens in North Carolina. Let's go down here and take that out of her column. Make that neutral. Let's go down and give her North Carolina. Here again, puts her over the top. This is a key state. People are talking about Pennsylvania, and it is huge. And I truly believe at the end of the story, that's going to determine the next president of the United States. But North Carolina is a huge player in this election. If she steals that state, and she's able to hold Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, she's going to be the 47th president of the United States. Doesn't matter if Trump takes Pennsylvania or not. Look at this. He's still going to come up short. This is the path. North Carolina is huge. Nevada is huge. That's a scenario that best works for Vice President Harris. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. Would also love to see you subscribe. You'll get first notification when I post a new video. Thank you for joining me.